So today we're talking about embracing the movement of life. And to me, this is a fundamental question. It's not just a light thing. How do I embrace flow in my life? It's not like that. It's deeper than that. Hey Jackie. It's fundamental because some of the reasons we struggle in life, some of the reasons we struggle with change and flow and even accessing our truth, accessing our soul, I believe comes out of a fundamental question of whether flow is even safe. Is change okay? Is renewal natural? Is there even such a thing as security? Because a lot of times our fears are based in a false security that we've been taught. And that can be in jobs, relationships, personal journeys, everything. And if we have a fundamental belief, everything spins from there. It's like my mathematical mind. I would always say, well, we have to go back to first principles. So if you're going to discuss a scientific topic, if you're going to discuss a mathematical topic or any structural topic, right, is really what I'm saying, we can argue about it at this level. But what if we actually have different foundational assumptions? One person assumes this is true, another person assumes this is true. The whole trees build differently, and you can't have a discussion. And we're actually going to be talking in different languages. So this is what we need to do in our own lives. If we find our inner world battling, like two mathematicians or two scientists going at it, going, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, because this is what our brain feels like a lot, especially when we're growing. Like if we actually risk growth, if we actually risk changing, there's going to be a discussion in our head as the old guard has to step aside for something new to come. You know, to me, if we're never confused, we're not growing. I think the comfort zone we live in is guarded by whatever belief system we have, and within that belief system, we're allowed to grow and change, but everything beyond there must not be allowed, or it wouldn't be our comfort zone. So if we start growing beyond it, questions must happen. And what are those questions? The questions become, what are my fundamental beliefs? What are the first principles that I believe life is all about? And this question about movement versus a static existence or a still or an existence that doesn't change. We may have a fundamental belief that life is best when it doesn't change. Life is best when I keep the same job forever. Life is best when my relationship, whether we stay in it forever or not, whatever we're doing in it stays the same, that nothing changes. This is a fundamental belief that we are taught. Figure life out and then just do that for the rest of your life. If anyone threatens that stronghold, fight them. Fight that change. This is a huge part of our system. That this is right and this is wrong and this is a good life and that's not. Well, if we're desperately trying to live a good life and something else comes up and our soul wakes up and gets all excited, if we have a fundamental belief that says change is bad, we won't do it. And then what happens? We become depressed. We become apathetic. We don't know what to do anymore. Because we're actually fundamentally not just afraid of change, that we believe change is bad and we believe change is dangerous. One of my favorite philosophers was Epictetus. I don't even know how to say his name. Epictetus. Anyway, ancient Greek philosopher. I love him because he was kind of a badass. Like he would make fun of Pythagoras or make fun of Socrates. And that just tickles me somewhere inside that, ancient Greek philosophers made fun of each other. That just, in the land of fundamental things that just don't fit, that hits a philosophical funny bone inside of me. But one of his foundational principles that he taught was that life is movement. All living things move, all living things change. That the only things that don't change are dead things or inanimate objects. And this is what he fought for. And to him, anyone that was living a life that was static, that didn't allow change, they actually weren't even having a human experience. They were having a robot experience, they were having a slave experience, they were having something else, but they were not being human, and therefore they weren't worth his time, which is why he was such a character, I think. He's the one who coined the phrase that you can't step in the same river twice. That all life is about change. That if you go into nature, if you go into unadulterated nature, I don't mean people's sculpted lawns and gardens, but an actual forest, it changes before your eyes. Leaves fall, trees fall, new things grow, new animals are born, animals are killed, things happen. This is constantly changing. This is life. And imagine that our fundamental idea of life was constant change and growth. Like this is, it rings little fear bells inside of us that, yeah, but not everything, right? Like this can stay though, right? And it's like, in nature, all things are in a perpetual state of growth. They're in a state of birth, life, decay, death. This is a natural pattern of life. Imagine living this way. And again, to understand, this doesn't mean that all things die. It just means that if life is actually left it passes on and becomes fodder for something new. I mean, you go down to California and you see these magnificent redwoods. Well, unless humans get in the way, they're not going anywhere. It isn't that there is nothing stable in the world. That's not it. Constant change doesn't mean that we lose everything. Great banyan trees. Great, these things live forever. Huge mountains. Maybe that's why we love the sight of mountains, because we just look at them and we know how solid they are. We look at the great oceans and we say, like, we don't even have words. You just sort of, wow. And even within us, there are aspects of being human that never change. That we are loving, that we care, that we grow and change and expand. Even that is a constant in a weird way. So imagine instead, it's like, I think of Jim, and he used to talk about how we need different reference points in life. I've spoken about these before, that very often we consider our reference points, the things that we hold tight to, things like my job, my relationship, my money, my status, all these things. But these are all transient. These are the things that can change. They're nothing. They're made up. They're constructs. They're no different than, I used to remember watching my kids play in the woods, and especially if they didn't have any electronics or anything, when we go camping, and they would just they would do make-believe. Okay, here's the castle, and here's this. So you live over there, and I live over here, and then we're going to go over here. They're just making it up. That's all of our stuff. Jobs, success, prestige, pride, relationships. It's all just something we're playing at. Those things change. And he said that as long as those are the things that we hold tight to, we will live in constant fear because we're constantly afraid they're going to change. But according to Epictetus, life is change. So we're actually spending all this energy going against our basic human nature? And this is a very interesting fundamental question for each of us to ask ourselves. Do I believe that change is normal? Do I believe in the cycle of life? Do I believe that I am meant to be renewing in every moment? It's a really important personal question. After I wrote What If You Could Skip the Cancer, a lot of people started coming to me for counseling, like back in 1999, I guess. And at that point, I didn't have a counseling degree or anything like that. I'd just been through some big experiences, and people just really wanted someone to talk to about their own experiences, I think. So I decided to go back to university, and because I had a math degree, but that really had nothing to do with counseling. Maybe had a lot to do with philosophy and big picture and quantum concepts, but nothing to do with modern psychology. So I went back to university to study psychology. And I remember sitting in this psych class, and they were talking about the myelination of the brain. And the myelination of the brain, what that means, I apologize for anyone who English is a second language. I'm going to write this word here. Myelin sheath. So when you're born, we are made of neurons. And the neurons are considered gray matter because they're gray colored. So we're just sort of these bumbling neurons, and the neurons start to move into all the aspects of who we're going to be. They become eyeballs, they become hair, they become bone. Then we're born, and these massive neurons in the brain are just kind of all over the place. So you see the baby kind of just sitting there looking around. Then as the baby starts to go ba, ba, da, da, and they start to connect that, oh, I can make sound intentionally. The neurons in the temporal lobes here start to create a myelin sheath, a white coating over the gray matter. And this is called myelination. So all of this starts to myelinate. The nerves start to learn. They become superhighways. Then as the baby starts to move its feet and it starts to realize, whoa, I'm putting it together that I can move my feet intentionally, this part of the brain starts to myelinate because it's learning. And then this goes on, and they talk about how by age 8 to 10, the frontal cortex, where we have abstract thought, this starts to myelinate because we're able to do this, and this continues. Then he says, and around age 18, the myelination process ends in most humans, and you continue on your life. And I thought, you know when someone says something and you know he's totally wrong? I was like, that's totally wrong. But of course, I'm the annoying, mature student in the back of the classroom going, what? Everyone else is literally just like, what's on the test, man? I don't care. Just what's on the test. And I'm like, that's not true. That doesn't make any sense. Especially at the time, I don't know what the current theory is, was they were talking about that Alzheimer patients, people who had dementia, it was actually a breakdown of these myelin sheaths. And they were blaming all kinds of things like aluminum and what have you. This was a long time ago. But this idea that dementia is the opposite process of this learning, right? Because if you imagine an electrical cord or an electrical cord, I'm just going to say cord, if it was just bare wires, it would be snapping, and if they touched each other, they would go haywire. So you put electrical tape on it to protect it, and that's like the myelin sheath. And when our neurons all have these lovely, healthy myelin sheaths, we can think clearly. So it's always interesting to ask ourselves, what is destroying the myelin sheaths? What's causing these things, right? So kind of leads you into a wonderful thing about learning about doing pranayama and meditation to actually rebuild the neural pathways of the mind, right? It's pretty cool. So I I actually became very interested in this idea that at the age 18, we stopped creating myelin sheaths in the brain. And this made no sense to me, and to the point that if I had have continued in my studies and gone on to get a doctorate or something, I was actually going to do my thesis about that. And actually my idea was to go into seniors' homes and somehow measure the current myelination of the brain, which I don't even know if is possible, and then have everybody learn something. Then you have to learn something. You can't just expand in something you already know. You actually have to learn something new to create a myelin sheath. It's like if you've ever learned an instrument, the first time you sit down at the piano, your fingers, it's like your fingers aren't even connected to your brain. They don't know how to hit the keys, so it's painful. It's like, learning to tie your shoe. Like you're like, I just can't do it. But then you sleep, and in the course of the evening, the myelination happens in the brain, and the next day you sit down and it's easy. And then a year later, it's so effortless. You can't fathom that moment way back when you didn't have all these neural pathways. But this is an interesting thing, this fundamental belief that after age 18, nobody grows. Nobody learns. Like, this is what they're talking about. That once you leave high school, and even if you go into university, how many people go to university, but now they just expand on the things they're good at. They continue the study within their comfort zone. Are they learning something brand new? Really? We don't. We kind of have this idea that, well, now I'm a grown-up human. Now I'm adult size. So now I'm static. Now I'm set, and now I'm going to live this life for the rest of my life. I no longer have to grow. I no longer have to learn. I no longer have to expand. I no longer have to live outside my comfort zone because I am a full-grown adult now. And this is fascinating to me. Because when you think of how often people do that, it's that difference between, are you 50 years old because you've actually lived 50 different years, or have you just lived the same year 50 times? And to really understand how systemic this fundamental idea is, when you look at even jobs, what's the ideal job? A job that you have here and you stay at it until you retire because you're guaranteed a pension. The stability of that is so deep in our system. And again, where does it come from? Living through war, living through famine, living through depressions, living through all kinds of things where we want financial security. But when we have it, but again, we're living in 2021 now. So this is why we're questioning this now. We understand where it comes from. We understand where the desire for that heavy structure comes from. But what do we need today? Because what's really interesting is structure and flow, the masculine structure to the feminine flow, they go together. It isn't about deleting all structure, right? It's about how do they work together that they build each other up. But when we look at some of the things that keep us fixed, these structures oppress flow. They oppress creativity. They oppress the soul. That's what we have to look at. We have to look at the structures in our life that maybe we believe are security. We believe that they are important. But are they allowing full flow in our life? This is the question we have to ask. Because maybe they are. Maybe it's an amazing structure that gives me full freedom. It's funny when you look up the history of Henry Ford and the industrial revolution and things. Apparently before 1924, workers were working like 100-hour weeks. And he actually came up with the idea of the 40-hour work week, and with 2 days off and all this kind of thing. But it wasn't necessarily for the benefit of the people. It was because they realized that if all of the working class were working 100 hours a week, they would have no leisure time to go and actually buy the cars they were making. People needed leisure time. They needed a chance to actually spend the money that they were making. We live in such a funny world. Like you just sort of look back at history and go, wow, like, isn't that something? But anyway, but it's okay. We just understand where we come from. We can go into a huge history lesson and, analyze the human psyche that way. But the key is to look at us right now and ask ourselves, could my work flow? When we imagine, historically, if we were farming or we were gardeners or something, obviously we flowed with the seasons. Even raising children, everything's always changing. If you build houses, if you live in Canada, anyway, this is seasonal work, right? It's an interesting world we've created where there's nothing seasonal about it. It is this is how it goes. It's funny, some people even equate it to the oppression of the feminine in all people, not just in women, but the idea that as women, we are chemically different every day of the month. Like we actually cycle. And when that is sort of enforced in sort of this masculine structure that every single person is going to act this way every single day of the week, it doesn't work. But it doesn't work for anybody. That we all are cyclical. We all must shift and change and have highs and lows. That the human being, like this is the question, what is it to be human? We know how to be robots. We know how to do that. We know how to, am I clicking into this? And now I will simply see this through all the way to the end, no matter what. We know how to do that. We're really good at it. And even there's a fundamental teaching that says this is, stoic and perfect and wonderful. And, it's so weird how we have fundamental beliefs that are actually kind of inhuman. So it's interesting to kind of look at it and say, what can I do? And I'm not saying we should all go quit our jobs or anything. I'm just saying interesting to look at. Interesting to look at the fundamental belief inside of me. And maybe you're in a 9-to-5 job that you love. You love the structure. You love knowing that this is where your day starts, this is where your day ends. Like, I remember when we left the farm. And so, of course, on the farm, everything's super seasonal. And there's structure, but there's also massive seasonal shifts with planting and everything else and harvest. And of course, our life was so dependent on the weather, like so dependent on the weather. We could work and work and work. And then the hay gets rained on and an entire crop is destroyed. So farming's not easy. This seasonal thing I'm talking about, there's a reason that we like the structure. So I remember when we sold the farm and moved into town, and Wayne got a job. I don't know who he got a job with at first. Anyway, but he got a job in town, and I had the train station, but he got another job. And I remember getting the first paycheck, and he's like, look at that. I just got a paycheck, whether it rained or not. Like just from working 40 hours, I just got a paycheck. Like it was such a novel idea to just get paid for showing up and doing the work. Like it's not dependent on the weather or our success. Weird, right? So I'm not saying it's bad to have a 9-to-5. That's not it. The question becomes, are we also flowing? Is this structure creating flow in our life as well? Are we allowed to move within it? Are we allowed to grow within it? Right? Because it's all about movement. We are souls. And maybe this job is a beautiful vehicle that allows us to experience life. But are we changing and growing inside of there? Are we in constant renewal? Or is this job literally sucking the life out of us and we're not in movement? It's the same in relationships. You imagine, like, let's say you find the love of your life and you're together. There is such a strange fundamental idea that, oh good, we found each other. Let's just preserve this moment for the rest of our life. Like, let's not change anything. And even if we don't say that out loud, we kind of do it inside. And again, maybe it comes from all kinds of history where divorce was illegal. You couldn't leave anyway. You were kind of, stuck together or whatever. But imagine today it's different. Let's come into the present time. And imagine this is a beautiful vehicle for change. What if a relationship isn't this static, I'm just going to hold on tight for security thing? Instead, it's this amazing container for personal growth and expansion and renewal and interaction, right? That we actually get to interact with this other person. Imagine. I think next week I'm doing a talk called Reciprocal Relationships, about how we actually affect each other. This is really powerful. Imagine if we change our fundamental belief system that by being in a relationship, growth, change, renewal is the norm. Imagine how different everything is. So then all of a sudden something comes up, something is difficult. If we believe in this static structure and our partner says, hey, I'm kind of having an issue with this thing that happened. If this is where we are, what are we going to do? What are you talking about? Oh, so you're saying we're going to be all defensive and we're going to be hurt and we're going to take it personally and we're going to, and so you're saying for every time we ever did, whether we say this out loud or we say it in our minds, we fight the change. We fight this new information. But if on a fundamental level we believe that relationships are in constant flux, but our love is the constant, our connection is the constant, but everything else is constantly fluxing around us. The other person says, hey, so this thing happened and I'm not really feeling comfortable with it. Can we talk about it? The other person goes, awesome. Okay, I got some coffee. Let's chew it out, right? And we just talk about it because it's just new information. Oh, change is assumed. Shift is assumed. And change doesn't mean they're leaving. Like, change doesn't have to mean the death of something. It just means newness. Like, this is a fundamental thing. That what if new things are expansion? What if that thing that our partner comes to us with actually takes our relationship into an even greater space than it ever was before? Because each one of us are constantly changing. Each one of us is constantly renewing and shifting and growing. It's almost like to actually have faith in each other that we can share that means that we want to keep going forward together. So I'm going to keep sharing all these cool changes with you because I want us to still be walking together, And if we're not walking together anymore, then we're not walking together anymore. There's nothing so grippy about that either. But then we imagine ourselves. Imagine our own personal growth. Imagine what if we believe what that professor said, well, that after age 18, we're not really meant to grow. I'm an adult now and this is what I believe and that's it. And then we just accumulate memories or something. We just accumulate experiences beyond that. Like, it's a really interesting fundamental belief that imagine the difference between an experience as something that I accumulate so I can tell a story, or I interpret this experience as something that actually changes me. And now I'm different. So I don't actually even need the memory of the experience because it's changed me. I'm a different person because of that memory. It's funny, last week my daughter came over and we watched the movie Patch Adams. And I watched Patch Adams back when my mom was still sick. So I would have been probably 20. Or, yeah, I think it came out in 1991 or something like that. But I watched it when I was 20. And I watched this movie like 30 years later, and I realized how many of my beliefs were fundamentally altered by that movie. That movie came into my life at such a critical time, such a raw time, that I was so seeking answers. I was so seeking a different way to understand life and death and illness and everything. And I watched Patch Adams, and it changed me. And it was so fascinating to watch it, because I could have written it today, because I'm different than I was when I watched it, because it's just so integrated into my being. So when you imagine yourself, when you imagine all the things that you've ever experienced and how they've changed you and how completely different you are, how different you are because you had that relationship or that job or that child or that friendship or that trip or that whatever, that this changed you fundamentally. And imagine this was normal, that we expect this as a human. That if I meet you in 5 years, you'll be fundamentally different, or maybe not fundamentally different, but you'll have morphed and changed and shifted, and this is completely normal. It's an interesting thing to really ask ourselves, what do we believe about ourselves? Imagine allowing our philosophical beliefs to change. Imagine that up until this point, this is what I've believed, but I'm now starting to imagine something different. We hold so strong to our philosophies. We hold so strong to our religious ideas. And it doesn't matter which way it is. We could be, total capitalist or total this or total, and it's like, no, this is important. I know this is important, and I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight for this. It's fascinating. It's fascinating when we realize how hard we're fighting for these old ideas, because we fundamentally don't believe in growth. We fundamentally believe that it is human to stay the same, and that this is the strength, is to hold strong in that stronghold. Imagine even what it means to live in the moment. Imagine we live right in this moment, right now. What are memories, really? Positive or negative? The ones that hurt us and the ones we loved. What are they? If we hold on to memories, what does that do to our current self? And don't get me wrong, I love memories. I've got pictures that fly over my screen when my computer goes to sleep. It's not that I'm against memories. But it's interesting how we hold on to the past, how we hold on to the difficult times, we hold on to the pain, we hold on to the ideas, we hold on to what we were raised in, all these things. Imagine we just lived now. What if we just actually lived at the edge of ourself right now? Because there's a fundamental belief that I've experienced in the world that we're meant to just sort of live in the past, that this is normal, that I'm just going to live in the past. It's almost like we don't even believe there is anything forward, except kind of just bringing me and my past down this chronological time. But I'm just bringing me and my past through time. That's all I'm doing. Instead of actually leaving whoever I was yesterday and bringing this person who is currently right here, and she is actually present, experiencing this moment and allowing this moment to change her in this moment, right? And then you move into the next moment, and then you move into the next moment. What is the past if we are constantly shifting? It's a fascinating thing, because I find myself, I trip up on this all the time, especially, let's say, I'm going to meet with friends or even go out with my kids or whatever. there's this natural thing inside to bring the past forward that, oh, okay, well, last time we did this, so I'm sure we're probably going to do this. And it's like, what if we just met them where they are today and we didn't figure out what we're going to talk about? Like, I don't know what your brain's like, but my brain likes to kind of have the conversations ahead of time if I'm not careful. And then I'll snap out of it and I'll say, Katrina, just be in the moment. See what happens. Don't worry about it. Just relax. Just stay here. Stay in this constant movement, this constant flow. Because it's interesting to imagine ourselves sort of with all of our memories, positive and negative, happy, sad, grateful, angry, everything, all sitting behind us as we try to flow through the river, right? Or as we try to climb a new mountain. Do they help? Do they help with movement? Do they help us change? Do they help us shift? You know, and the weird thing is the funny thing about memories is they will rise when we need them. It's like if we completely release our attachment to the memories, painful and happy, they don't go away. No one even knows how memories work anyway. The greatest brain scientists today, the great neuroscientists, no one has ever seen a memory. Like there's absolutely zero science that understands how memories work. But all I know is I walk through life, like we were out for dinner on Sunday night and someone said, oh, remember that birthday party you had, Katrina? And we were in this big drive shed and we did this thing. And I was like, I don't remember. I like throwing my own birthday parties. It's a bit of a kick I like to do. And I had no memory of it. And yet, when I'm chatting with you guys, all these weird memories will just pop out of nowhere. And I'll share them with you. So it's not that the memories are gone. It's like they come up when they're needed, or they come up within the context of something interesting happening right now. But they're not just hanging around, slowing me down, you know. The last thing I want to mention about movement of life is when we actually move through life, when we actually allow ourselves to progress, we also allow ourselves to accumulate wisdom, or not even accumulate wisdom, but to become wise. We allow ourselves to actually change and grow and learn, which is why it's so interesting when we actually, as we get older, if we stay stuck in an old idea, we don't develop wisdom. We just get really good at holding to that belief. But if we release the beliefs and we allow ourselves to actually grow and change and look at things and be humble and do these kind of things, we accumulate wisdom because we start to understand real life, real human life, the cycle of pain and birth and joy and struggle and all these things. I don't know, we actually connect with what it is to be human. But it only happens if we allow ourselves to flow, which brings us back to that original fundamental question. Are human beings meant to flow? Are human beings meant to change and grow and expand throughout their lifetime? Or once we hit adult size, are we meant to be stagnant? And it's a really interesting question for each of us to ask ourselves, especially when we're struggling to make a decision, or we're struggling to make a choice, or we're struggling in a current life situation. And then we ask ourselves, is my struggle based on the belief that change is scary? You know, it's a very interesting question. I'm going to put my glasses on. So if you guys have any questions, big change is scary, but I think it's necessary for us to change that fear. Totally. Totally. You know what's really funny is that's another interesting thing about enjoying it as an adult. Because so often, because we are so fixated on the youth, our own youth, we become obsessed with looking 20, that we don't want to have any of these like gray hairs and stuff, right? I don't care if people could color their hair, but we have this obsession with looking 20 years old. Well, I'll tell you, I am 50 something, 52. I love the 50s. I love it. Life is so entertaining now. I wouldn't go back to being 20 for $1 million. Okay, maybe I might. No, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? So it's really something to, it's like we're so much stronger as adults to handle change. We have autonomy. We have life experience. We have all this amazing foundation within us, and we have friends, and we've learned stuff. Change is, this is the best time to experience change and flow, because we have such an amazing foundation of experience underneath us, right? What if your change fundamentally threatens someone else's ideas, and then you just are open to becoming more you, and that's what your partner's afraid of? Yeah, it's a huge deal. I think that's one of the biggest reasons. Well, I was going to say that's one of the biggest reasons we don't change, because it's our fear of what other people think. But the truth is, like, when I change, I just become me. I don't suddenly become someone else. I actually become me. And when I become more me, I'm flowier. Like, I'm actually easier to live with. I'm easier to get along with. I'm easier because I'm happy. It's almost like, when you hear someone speak the truth, there's a stillness in the ethers. But if someone's saying something that isn't quite true, you can almost feel the static on the line. If you're living with someone who is not living their truth, you're living with constant static. So if this person comes more into their own truth, there's actually this beautiful stillness inside. So fundamental shifts into our own being, it's always lovely, right? It's always a good thing. And if someone else is struggling with that, there's other big things going on there, right? How to approach having difficulties making a decision, how to hear our soul's calling rather than clinging to old patterns. It's so interesting, because I think that's where the whole teaching around following your bliss, hearing joy, we've misunderstood it. It isn't just following my bliss, isn't I'm just going to do anything I want, not care about anybody. Like, that's not following our bliss. Following our bliss is in that moment you're talking about. I'm having difficulty making a decision. I don't know whether this is my calling. I don't know whether I'm being affected by someone else. I don't know whether I'm being affected by my own belief systems. What is the truth? How do I make this choice? And this is where bliss is the answer. When you say, if I make this choice, how does my soul respond? If my soul responds with, this is the important thing. That's what the teaching is. If my soul goes, this is the most important litmus strip we have. This is the most important dowsing mechanism we have, is our soul to tell us. And we feel it through bliss, through joy, through lightness, right? What makes us feel light? What makes us feel heavy? They're all the same thing, helping us in those moments of question. They aren't about big pictures. A lightness could mean taking a job that we work 80 hours a week. That might be like, you know what? That's what I want to do. Like, what a bartender I would make. I bartended to pay my way through university. And I love bartending. It was so much fun. Right? And if someone said, Katrina, you're going to sit there and talk to people for 80 hours a week, and I'd say, awesome. That would feel lighthearted to me, right? I'm thinking about the focus and repetition needed to master things like Olympic athletes. They have to keep doing the thing over and over, different than changing, flowing to the next thing. It's interesting when you think of that, the journey to mastery, and then you imagine the definition, the fundamental definition of the word discipline. That today, the fundamental definition of discipline is you do the thing, you do it over and over and over and over, and you get your 10,000 hours in, and then you will be a master. But it's very, again, and when you look at the relationship of the masculine and feminine dynamic, this is the masculine oppressing the feminine, saying, you will do this 10,000 hours, get it, then you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it, right? Imagine we shift that. We'll shift it to even. Discipline comes from the word disciple, that which we love, that which we want to grow in, right? We expand in our discipleship of something, whether it's piano or downhill skiing or anything we want to do, we expand in it. And a true discipline, you can't get that person off the mountain. You can't get that person off the horse. You can't tear that kid away from the piano. That is true discipline, because they want to be there, because their soul wants this mastery. And do they do it over and over and over again? Yes. In true healthy mastery, where the soul and the structure is working together and strengthening each other, this is soul-driven discipline, as opposed to external discipline. And my experience of people who are like that, they naturally change it up as well. They shift and grow as they get better. As they get stronger, they go to bigger hills. As they get stronger, they change the thing, like they change it up to constantly be growing, constantly creating new neural pathways. So it's a very interesting thing to look at it. Look at the difference between an externally imposed discipline and maybe the rigor that is imposed there, and something that is naturally happens. Many great masters, it just comes from the inside out. They put 10,000 hours in because they wanted to, right? What about taking ourselves too seriously? I think about this in my life's purpose and clinging to the idea of it and its importance. It's it is such an interesting balance, the idea of taking ourselves seriously. On the one hand, it's funny, I was just talking to my sister about this morning, because when I was young, I was so focused, like really focused, to the point that in today's world, I would call myself selfish. Because if I wanted to accomplish something, I just accomplished it. I didn't consider other people or whatever. It's not that I didn't care about other people. I just simply knew, okay, here's what I had to accomplish. If I wanted to go to university, okay, then I needed to work and I needed to make money and then I needed to go to school, and this is what I just did it. And this incredible focus, this ability to take my path very seriously, allowed me to accomplish anything I put my mind to. It was so clear. And then I got married, and something changed inside of me. Like I don't blame my husband for this at all. This was 100% me and some ancestral patterns I was pulling in. I don't know what it was. But suddenly, all that taking myself seriously changed to taking everyone else seriously. That all of a sudden, all that mattered was what my husband felt or what my in-laws felt. And what do they need done? And so suddenly all this energy I had inside of me was focused on them. And everyone else's lives I took very seriously, and my life didn't matter. So in that time, I didn't take my life seriously at all. I didn't take my hopes and dreams seriously at all. All that mattered was everyone else. And then, of course, becoming a mom and blah, 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 blah. But even that, I think it was the marriage piece, because my kids are actually extremely independent. Like, we have very healthy relationships. And so this idea of taking ourselves seriously, I now, in my 52nd year or 53rd year, am giving myself the freedom to take myself seriously. Again, and allowing myself to accomplish things again, uninhibited by others. That this soul is allowed to express herself uninhibited. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I haven't expressed myself in the last 20 some or 30 years, but it's different. It's like there's a clarity and an ease and a joy because I take my soul's path seriously, more seriously than any ideas I've accumulated over the last 30 years that other people's lives are more important than my soul's path. So on the one hand, taking our soul's path seriously is really cool. I think when we take ourselves too seriously in a negative way, we get too attached to the outcome, that we think that somehow if we aren't successful in some physical way, within the construct, that we've failed or something, or that there's something wrong with us. Because it's like when you write a book and you write a book and we think, oh, if I write this book, then I'll be famous and people will think I'm smart, or people will think I'm this, or I'm the leading voice in whatever. These are all the wrong reasons to write books. The best reason to write a book is because it's an amazing expression of your soul. And it's an amazing journey to write that out. What it does out there in the world, that's all transient. That's irrelevant. It makes no difference. Taking that seriously, like how it fits out there, yeah, we can't take that seriously. But taking our soul's path seriously, that changes everything. For me, that's like the beginning of pure joy and ease, like genuine ease inside. The same thing happened to me when I got married. I was modeling my mom's way of being in a marriage. I now understand what happened, and I'm journeying with my soul again. Exactly. Yeah. But again, it's interesting. And I think with the relationship questions, this is where this primary question, this fundamental question is so important. Because not only, if you look at you, do I believe that growth and change is normal in myself and in relationship? And if I'm in a committed long-term relationship with someone, that our relationship and our lives are intertwined, what do they believe? Do they believe that fundamental change and growth is normal in themselves and in the relationship? Because very often, if we're struggling with someone, we have a different fundamental belief system. They believe that keeping everything the same means it's a success. And this person thinks that change and growth is normal. So then everything that happens, we're having an argument up here, but the truth is this person doesn't want anything to change, because on a fundamental level, change is scary, it's wrong, and it probably means the end is coming. And that's why it's so interesting when we're having a discussion to always boil it down to the fundamental belief system. And then we can have a conversation about what we're really struggling with. And to have that conversation, and even then, you might not even have to change their mind. But if every conversation begins with the understanding, I know that you want everything to stay the same. So, you know what I mean? We can actually have the conversation within that fundamental belief system. And who knows what happens from there? Maybe it shifts a little, maybe it doesn't. But if we ignore this, we just battle. It's just this battle. And that's not even what we're battling about. And that's the problem. There's no solution there, right? So thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you soon.